Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make a pumpkin pound cake with a delicious cream cheese frosting, and this is what it looks like. This is a dense and flavorful pound cake that's wonderful on its own, but even better when you frost it with a maple flavored cream cheese frosting and then some toasted nuts. So the first thing you will need to do is preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. And then you will need a loaf pan, and then we're going to butter the loaf pan. So what I do is I just melt a little bit of butter, and then with the pastry brush, I'm just going to coat the whole pan. Make sure you get into the corners. And then to make doubly sure that our cake does not stick to the pan, I'm going to flour it. So I'm just going to take a little bit of flour, put it in there. Now you can buy like these vegetable sprays that have the flour already in them, so you can use that. And then I just kind of go around here, make sure everything's coated. Now if you're at home, you might want to do this over the sink, but it's going to be noisy. Just tap it out, and there you have it. And then I like to just, you don't have to, but I like to just put a little piece of parchment on the bottom of the pan. So, now for this batter, if you have a stand mixer, you can use your paddle attachment, or you could use a hand mixer for this. The first thing you will need is 3/4 of a cup, which is 170 grams of butter. Have your butter at room temperature. I like to use unsalted butter. I prefer the flavor, and I also like the fact that I control the salt rather than if it's already salted butter. So what I'm going to do is just beat this on medium speed just until it's nice and creamy. The added advantage of just kind of beating your butter like that is if it was a little firm, you know, maybe not quite at room temperature, beating it for, you know, half a minute or so will soften it up. So now, you will need 2/3 of a cup, which is 135 grams of granulated white sugar, and then I'm also adding a 1/2 cup, 100 grams of light brown sugar. And then I also like to add, for flavoring, 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of pure vanilla extract. So now I'm going to beat this on medium-high speed. I want it, you know, everything to get mixed together and it to become light in color and quite fluffy. Depending on your type of mixer, that can take anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, so this is what you're looking for. You can see it's quite light in color, nice and fluffy. So now, you know, every once in a while, scrape down the sides and the bottom of your mixing bowl to make sure everything gets mixed together. And now we are going to add 3 large eggs, one at a time. Now you want to have your eggs at room temperature. And then if you want to go by weight, that would be 150 grams of eggs. So that's out of the shell. So I'm going to add 1, beat that in. Okay. Mix next one. Okay, and last one. Okay, scrape. So now for our dry ingredients, in a separate bowl I have 1.5 cups, which is 195 grams of all-purpose flour, or you may know that as plain flour. And to that I am adding 3/4 of a teaspoon, that's 3 grams of baking powder, 1/4 of a teaspoon, 1 gram of baking soda, 1/4 of a teaspoon, 1 gram of salt. I like to use the kosher salt. I prefer the flavor, but you could use a regular table salt. And then if you used salted butter, then just leave out that salt. And then for flavoring, you know, pumpkin, typically we like to flavor it with ground cinnamon. So I have 3/4 of a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and then I like to add 1/4 of a teaspoon of ground ginger and 1/4 of a teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg. Of course, you could vary that if you wanted to. Sometimes I like to add, you know, about 1/4 of a teaspoon of ground cloves. You could add that or not. And then I'm just going to whisk all these together, make sure it's thoroughly mixed. You could sift your dry ingredients as well. And then what we're going to do, of course, we're making a pumpkin pound cake. We need pumpkin. So I am using, we're going to add 1/2 cup, which is 120 milliliters, 120 grams of pure pumpkin puree. Now I'm just using the canned. Buy this, if you're using the can, buy the one that doesn't have the spices added. If not, you could make your own. And to that, I'm going to add just 2 tablespoons of milk. Let's mix that together. So what I'm going to do is alternate back and forth between adding the dry ingredients and my pumpkins. So I'm going to add maybe, you know, about 1/3 of our flour mixture. Beat that in, do it slowly. You don't want that flour coming up. Okay. And add about 1/2 of your pumpkin. Okay, a little more of our flour. The rest of our pumpkin. I'm going to give that a scrape. Flour on the sides there. Get to the bottom. And then finally the rest of our flour. If you like, you could add some chopped nuts here, maybe 1/2 cup, 50 grams, you know, walnuts, pecans, hazelnuts, almonds. Okay, and that's done. Isn't too bad. So I got a little flour on the sides of my bowl. I'm just going to do that by hand. Pretty color batter. Okay, and now we're just going to pour that into our pan. Okay. And then you take either the back of a spoon, or I just have an offset spatula, kind of press it down and then even it out. So now, for baking, everyone's oven is a little different. I find, so I'm going to give you a bit of a range here, somewhere between 55 and 65 minutes. I would check it at the 55. Because the one thing you don't want to do with the pound cake is over bake it, really any cake, because it can be dry if you over bake it. And, you know, well, you can put some butter on it and kind of make it a little better. It's, you know, you want it nice and moist. So there we go. So what you want, it will rise, color nicely, and then a toothpick inserted into the center will come out clean. You will find some cracking on the top of a pound cake. That is perfectly normal. I find about halfway through baking, you know, turn your pan front to back for even baking. So somewhere between 55 and 65 minutes. Okay, so our pumpkin pound cake is done. Beautiful golden brown. As you can see, there is a crack, perfectly normal. And a toothpick inserted into the center will come out clean. So put your pan on a wire rack. We're going to let it cool in the pan about 15 minutes, and then when we come back, we will remove it from the pan. So to remove our cake from the pan, first just take like an offset spatula or knife and run it on the inside just to make sure it's not sticking. Okay, looks good. Then just take a wire rack, flip it, it's still a little warm. Put my mitts on here, and there we go. Just peel that parchment off, and then we'll flip it back right side up. So still warm, so I'm just going to let that cool completely, and then when we come back, we will make our frosting. So to make our maple flavored cream cheese frosting, if you have a stand mixer, use your paddle attachment, or you could use a hand mixer for this. So you will need 4 ounces, which is 115 grams of a regular cream cheese. It's a full fat, and have that at room temperature. And I'm also using 2 tablespoons, 25 grams of butter, and have that at room temperature as well. So I'm just going to beat this on medium speed until it's nice and creamy and smooth. We don't want any lumps. Okay, so scrape down the sides and bottom of the bowl. And then you will need 1.5 cups, which is 180 grams of confectioner sugar. You may know that as powdered or icing sugar. And I do like to sift it to get rid of the lumps, because it does tend to have lumps. Put that in there. And then for our maple flavor, I'm adding 1 tablespoon of pure maple syrup. And that will give us a fairly nice maple flavor, but I'm going to just going to intensify that flavor a little bit. I'm adding what is called maple flavor, and it's kind of like a concentrated maple syrup. And I'm just adding about 1/8 of a teaspoon. You could also use the same amount of like a maple extract, or you can leave it out if you can't find it. It usually comes in these little bottles. A little goes a long way. So now I'm just going to beat this until everything's mixed together. Do it on low speed to start. Okay, that looks good. Now at this point, you can check the consistency. If you found it too thin to frost your cake, you could add a little more sugar. If you found it too thick, you could add a little more maple syrup or even just a little milk to thin it out. But I'm happy with that. So now we are just going to frost our pound cake. Now, like I said before, you don't have to frost this. This cake is excellent, just plain. But everything's better with the frosting, right? And for special occasions. I'm just going to put most of that on the top, and then I'm going to use an offset spatula. You could just use the back of a spoon. Now you could just frost the top, but we're going to frost the whole thing. So just going to push it down the sides. Okay, so little swirls there. That looks good. And then if you want, what I've done is I've toasted some walnuts, and you can just do that in a 350-degree Fahrenheit, 180-degree Celsius oven. Just put your walnuts or even pecans on a baking sheet, and then just bake them about 8–10 minutes until they start to, you can start to smell the nuts, and that's when I take them out. And then let them cool, and then coarsely chop. I think it adds flavor, it adds a little crunch, and then it looks great on the top. So, you know, maybe a half to 1 cup, depending on how many nuts you want. So 50 to 100 grams chopped nuts. I like lots. So there we have it. So now, let's see if I can do this. Transfer it to cake plate, or I'm putting on a cutting board because we are going to try a piece. You will need to, if you have it, if you don't frost it, you can store it at room temperature several days, or you can put it in the fridge. It'll last even longer. You could freeze it. But if you put the frosting on it, you will have to refrigerate it. And then what I like to do is to bring it to room temperature before serving. Oh, doesn't that look gorgeous? I think the color of the frosting matches the cake and the chopped nuts really well. So I'm just going to cut a little piece off here. I like the frosting. Take the end piece. Oh, very good. You have like pound cakes. They're dense, they're moist. This one has a really, not a real strong pumpkin flavor, but very nice. And then with the spices, a ground cinnamon, ginger, and nutmeg adds a lot. And then that maple cream cheese frosting is wonderful. And it goes so well with the cake. And then the little crunch of the nuts. Nice, very nice cake. You got to try this one. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of JoyBaking.com.